Okay, so let's see how much we cocked the world. So the 18th century, which we just covered, is this sort of slow continuation that we're seeing of the improvement of the firearms. And really, the firearms haven't improved that much by the time you hit Napoleon. But running through the entire 18th century, you had sort of this strong linear nature to combat until you hit really the American Revolution, at which point some slightly different tactics start taking hold. And now, starting with the French Revolution, really, you've got, well, a little before the French Revolution, the French have totally reworked the artillery arm. And some technological changes and a lot of doctrinal changes. And those same changes spill over into the Revolutionary period with changes in how the armies are formed and how much of the population is being drafted into them. The levée en masse, for example, where you're no longer fighting with a professional band of soldiers who are drilled, but you're also not fighting with complete rabble. You have people who are lightly trained, understand how to use the gun well enough, can march in formation to some extent, especially later it gets better, but in huge quantities that we have not seen in a fighting force yet. And that's what really is brought here, where you start to see the operational games come into play now. Why? Because the armies are big enough to cover a lot of area. You can actually start to, really prevent the enemy from marching forward. Okay, so what do we get here with this? Well, let's look at some of the games. Age of Napoleon, this was a great find for me recently. Nice light little game by Phalanx. I think it does a pretty good job, and I think it qualifies as a war game, actually. Napoleonic Brigade series, I love this series. I haven't done anything on it yet. It's the growth of the Civil War Brigade series, and the first couple steps of it were really kind of these halting stumbles, where they just tried to translate the Civil War Brigade series into a Napoleonic game. Well, that didn't work terribly well. By the third incarnation, Talavera, the system has changed very, very heavily. Much, much more streamlined to play. It was always kind of clunky in the first two revisions. But I think it also manages to actually be more historically sound in terms of the maneuvers and the activities that happen there. A lot of good battles there. I still love Austerlitz the most out of the bunch. I've got another one of the Milton Bradley American Heritage series here, Broadside. Not really, well, definitely not a war game. This is more of a feel of a chess-like game. You move completely at your own will, basically, except there's some mines and some firing spaces that are kind of different. But the whole goal of this is to basically cross the T and get shots on enemy ships without getting shots on your own. You move them one ship at a time. And it's really not a simulation of anything. I've got Castle Risk in here because it's kind of based in the Napoleonic period. Empires in Arms. I have kind of this weird love, don't love so much relationship with Empires in Arms. Empires in Arms is one of the two games that Europa Universalis, which I love so very much, claims as its inspiration. The other one being Conquistador. And it's very clearly there. The combat system, the movement, etc., a lot of it's very much based on Empires in Arms. Empires in Arms, on the other hand, is lacking a lot of the detailed scope. So if you played the much, much smaller Europa Universalis version of the Napoleonic Wars, there's a scenario for it, as there is with just about anything during that 300 years of history, 200 years of history. Well, in a lot of ways you end up with more kind of historical flavor in the Universalis version. The Empires in Arms version, there's some weird stuff going on in it, like these mechanisms to where one person can cut a deal to declare war on another country in order for it to fall into a third player's hands or a second player's hands. I've just seen so many crazy deals made in Empires and Arms games. Maybe it's a matter simply of I'm more used to people who've studied it a little bit and said, this is how I can break the game. And if I was playing Universalis with people who studied it that much, I'd be just as disappointed in it. It's also, especially with the options for different powers reaching great power status, not just great power status, but dominant status, it can become a very weird sort of game, but I kind of like that aspect. It's just very seldomly have I seen the game feel very historical. Usually France is played by someone who wants to be aggressive in a way that I don't feel Napoleon really was. I feel like Napoleon was battered by events more, and that's often because the bidding system at the beginning of the game, which is kind of a weird system. You have to bid on every country, you have to bid a different value on every country. But that means that, you might, and they're, okay, so they're ordered, they come out to you in a specific order. So the first bid, I believe, is England. So conceivably, if everybody bid one on England, if nobody wanted England, someone who bid 50 points on France could end up getting stuck with England. And this was always my worry. How do I avoid getting England? I can get my one bid into England. Well, your one bid doesn't really matter on England. You can bid whatever you like if you get them, but you may not want to have England. When I play at Solitaire, I usually don't play with the bidding because it kind of confuses things. But the truth of the matter is there's some countries like France and Russia who can get away with a big bid and still maybe come out ahead of some of the other players. Whereas some of the other players lower down on the list can't get away with any bid at all. They're kind of a painful thing to be handed. So if you bid 20, 30, 40 points on France or Russia, you're in a better shape than getting Prussia for 3. At least in terms of being able to choose your own, destiny. Yes, the world could jump in and try to stop you as France, but that's hard to do. And if France had no bid, essentially, if they could get by with a 7 or free, I think that they're likely to win almost all the time. I've seen them go for 76, I think. And, my bid on them was like 35, which is about what I think Russia's worth, and I got away with Russia at a slightly lower, like 34. I don't know. Okay. Some free NBS stuff like Espinoza, which is available. Fury on Champlain I played recently. That was, again, a disappointment. This is a 3W game. I don't think 3Ws make me happy at all yet, unless the Wargamer was put out by them and they made one good game. Campaigns of Marlborough, which is still broken, but it's a good game. Fury on Champlain was interesting ideas, not well executed when it came down to playing it out. Fighting Sail, old SPI, I gotta get this one videoed. This is one of the coolest hidden movement games. You use chit selection to indicate what you're going to do. It broadly defines what your movement's going to be. Very, very nice way of handling that, and I'm hoping this is carried over to the GMT series. I remember seeing chits on people's ships there. Much, much better than the old plotted on paper movement that the Avalon Hill games had. Forgotten Napoleonic campaigns. Damned if I remember this. Egyptian campaigns and the Russo-Swedish War. Felt like Napoleon's Art of War. That's all I could really remember about it. Marengo, another NBS. Montebello, a free NBS. Napoleon's Art of War, I'm going to get this out if I haven't done any of them yet. I don't remember if I've done one of them. This is Battles of Dresden and Eylau. Came as a twofer in the magazine game. This is one of my gateway games. This is a way to get people into, really from nowhere, from like early role-playing to straight into wargaming very early. This is same series as Napoleon at Waterloo, the old free game. Nice little simple thing. I'm not a big fan of it. I've rated it a 4, but because it doesn't really capture the tactical feel. It feels like an operational World War II game pasted onto a Napoleonic theme, but that's okay. GMT's Napoleonic Wars. I really need to play this again. I played Age of Napoleon again and liked it again. I think I remembered liking this one. It's got that nice division of... Age of Napoleon is a 2-player game. Napoleonic Wars is a big multiplayer game, but unlike Empires and Arms, it focuses on that 2-player dynamic, or 2-sided dynamic. You're either pro-French or anti-French. And that's the same, and I think it's by the same designer, by the way. That's the same design in place as you have in War and Peace, or War and Pieces, as you might rather call it, which is, to me, actually that was the first of the big, I'm wondering why my order's all out of place. That was the first of the big Napoleonic strategic games. And it had flaws, there's no question. I mean, the campaign game to that was just broken, okay? Especially the 2-player rules with the diplomacy. Well, Napoleonic Wars seems to work perfectly fine. If Napoleon at Bay, this is the only Zucker game that I've played that I actually really enjoy. Operational style game on the Napoleonic theater. I don't enjoy it terribly much. I still find the decision making painful, way too much like the kinds of stuff that I disagree with in the CDGs. Might explain why they're popular. Ney versus Wellington. I have Wellington's Victory, or at least I have the box for it and all the numerical counters. I bought one at an auction. Really good price, $15, but it didn't come with the game. I got the money back, but I still kind of burned by that. That would have been a cool possession. Ney versus Wellington is that system. This was the very first war game I tried playing. Looked so exciting. Napoleonic battles. I think it was already punched, and it was just too much for me. And ever since then, it's been something of a mental block for me. I know I've handled more complicated games. I've played it since then, and even though I understand it, I think fairly completely, I still don't enjoy it for whatever reason. And I think there's better stuff out there. Some of the other Zucker games that I have, unfortunately, I don't have a great selection of them. I've picked up some more that maybe are better, and you'll see them on the list. But Struggle of Nations, this was such a broken game, and it looked so exciting with its long, thin pieces and its tiny little hexes. But in the end, the bad style of Avalon Hill board, they made the hard kind of cardboard boards that always warped, and then if you tried backfolding it, and they say, oh, we don't know why anybody would say to backfold your boards. Well, it's because the damn thing's warped and were unusable. Those damn boards snapped into, a dozen pieces, and this game just, between the rules, which were just terrible for it, complex ideas, and then these horrible, horrible boards, it just never was the fun I hoped it to be, and especially when you play it and nothing sits flat. It's just, I wish it had a paper map. Talavera, I've already mentioned, great final step in that series. War and Peace, I already mentioned. This was the first strategic game, not just for Napoleonic for me, but the first one that I really, really loved. After this, I got Third Reich, I got 1776, which I didn't like as much. But this was the one that I said, wow, I'm really beginning to see complex war games coming out, more than just these magazine games that I've got. Wellington versus Messina, another Napoleon's Art of War rehash. Wow, I've got a whole thing for Zucker Napoleonics, and in it I have 1809 as well. I haven't decided. I think I've slipped it to all one, to each having their own card is what happened. Why things got confused there. 1809 may be the best of the Zucker's games that I have, or that I've played. I still enjoy the simpler feel of Napoleonic Bay a little better. May also have to do with the kind of, the play feels a little stilted in 1809, as though there aren't that many options in it. It's a little more detailed than Napoleonic Bay, and it doesn't suffer from the problems that Struggle of Nations does. In fact, it has a very nice map and nice counters. But it never feels like I can do quite as much as I want to do. And Napoleonic Bay feels like I'm not putting as much effort into not doing what I'm hoping to do. So you see this transformation in the Napoleonic period, though, not just of the French army, but then eventually of all the continental armies, into something much, much more like a modern army. And this is really the beginning of what I consider the real modern era. We're going to see more and more of it as more technology comes in with the railroads. Let's see where I am. Yeah, let's stop there, and we'll go on to the American Revolution. Now, I've got a kind of weird thing. I'm not doing everything chronologically. Obviously, I'm not doing each particular century chronologically, and I'm not doing the Napoleonic period. I actually go through them alphabetically. For whatever reason. When they're on my shelf, they're chronological. When they're in here, I don't do that because I don't know. After we do the American Civil War, we do what I call the colonial period, which actually spans both sides of the American Civil War. It's 19th century colonial. It runs, basically from the the Texan independence, the war with Mexico, stuff like that. But it does also run through after the Civil War to the operations in colonial Africa or in the Far East, where all the European powers are grabbing their colonies. So the Civil War gets kind of jump-started on its own. In with the colonial, I think we're going to see things like Franco-Prussian War and Crimean War and stuff like that. That were really not these big... I mean, this American Civil War for... Crimean War lasted a decent length of time, but the American Civil War was just this all-out titanic struggle, even though it wasn't very long. It was kind of like a World War II, almost a total war, in a way that the Napoleonic Wars even were not. And it's the addition of things like the railroads, and especially the railroads, that really make the supply of these large armies possible. And we'll get into that.